Everybody, one practical request, please have your phones at the ready, because I'm going to highlight in my talk a number of people I want you to support and follow, and a number of things I want you to read. And so I'd love you to capture those on your phone so you can go away and research them, and also, by the way, tweet them out so your entire network can as well. Earlier this year, Adweek very kindly gave me a Disruptors Award. And Katie Richards of Adweek called me up to interview me for it. And she said, "So, Cindy, how do you feel you've disrupted our industry?" And I said, "I haven't. I've spectacularly failed. I haven't disrupted anything because nothing's changing." And I said, "I'll tell you how I know nothing's changing. Because none of what I do is showing up in my bank account." And I made that point not out of self-interest, although obviously I would very much like it to show up in my bank account. I made it because it is emblematic of the bigger point, which is that our industry is not putting its money where its mouth is. The grand old man of our industry, Bill Bernbach, said, "A principle isn't a principle until it costs you money." The agencies, the holding companies, the brands that claim that their principles are equality, diversity, and inclusion are not spending money against those principles. And that is a false economy, because money in equals money out. I don't have to tell this audience that diversity drives infinitely better business. You've heard me say regularly, there is a huge amount of money to be made out of taking women seriously. Our industry is not taking women seriously. Earlier this year, I had the great honor to speak at the first ever 3% Conference Australia. Shortly before that, back in August, the agency Circle released the results of their diversity survey of the Australian advertising industry. This is a quote from the Ad News report. Amongst many other very depressing statistics, a staggering 42% of all female employees across all agencies reported they've experienced sexual harassment at some point in their career in advertising. 2/3 of people said harassment and discrimination are often made into a joke. Almost half, 45% of women said they feel vulnerable because they are women. I had to read that line several times over. Almost half of women said they feel vulnerable in the advertising industry because they are women. And by the way, this survey was done on the Australian advertising industry, but those stats will be pretty much the same for our industry anywhere else in the world. So I've been talking about sexual harassment publicly for quite a while, because very few people do. And when I saw how much the Harvey Weinstein scandal had brought out more and more women prepared to speak up publicly for the first time, I saw an opportunity to call for the same thing to happen in our industry. And so about 2.5 weeks ago, I posted on Facebook, and I urged women and men in our industry who are prepared to finally speak up and to name names, give agencies, to please contact me. And the reason I did that was because our industry has been running anonymous stories about sexual harassment for years. We've been doing surveys like this one, like the 3% Conference's own The Elephant on Madison Avenue, for years. And when we look at those anonymous stories, when we look at these statistics, women empathize and men don't give a shit. Because you can't relate to an anonymous story. It's like it didn't happen. You can't relate to what is really going on behind those statistics. And so the only way to break this wide open and end it once and for all is to attach names and agencies and holding companies and brands to those stories to demonstrate what is really going on and how seriously our industry should take it. So I posted that, and I got an avalanche of responses. I have to date had over 160 emails. And I knew it was bad before, but I had no idea how bad it really is. I am horrified, appalled, and disgusted. I am horrified at the scale and the scope and the timeline of the problem. I'm hearing from women for whom sexual harassment started in our industry 30 years ago, and I'm hearing from 22-year-olds who cannot believe the industry they voluntarily joined. I am horrified at HR professionals and departments who are a disgrace to the profession. I am horrified at the number of NDAs and payoffs. HR agencies, holding companies have been buying women's silence and men's silence for years. And because they've bought silence, their harassers have gone on to other jobs, gone on to harass again. I am horrified at the women who have been so culturally brainwashed, they do not support other women, they let other women down in this situation. And I'm horrified by the sheer fear and terror that people feel about speaking up. I hear again and again, I'll never work again, I'll be unemployable, I have a family, I can't do this. And that is because the men who are harassing are the gatekeepers to everything in our industry. They're the gatekeepers to jobs, to pay rises, to promotions, to awards, to ambitions, to careers, to fame, to fortune. So, this is enormously important because never before has this saying been truer of the women in our industry. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And the point I want you to take away from this slide is we are not at the table because we are on the menu. Yesterday, we all saw the gut-wrenching spectacle of 4 creative director mothers and their daughters on this stage talking about sexual harassment as a given, as a fact. And by the way, I wish that every man in our industry could watch that panel, because that was just heartbreaking. And on that panel, Kristen Emhoff told a story. And I want to reference that story because the biggest issue facing our industry today is not diversity, it's sexual harassment. Because sexual harassment actively prevents equality, diversity, and inclusion from ever happening. So, Kristen Emhoff told a story about how, as a young woman, she was going to meet at an industry event, a professional event, a man whom she enormously respected, a creative superhero, someone she was so excited about meeting, whom she really looked up to. And she was introduced to this man in a professional environment surrounded by other men, her professional peers. And this man said to her, "I thought the first time I met you, you'd have your legs behind your ears." I've had many, many stories like this. The young woman, many years ago, in a meeting, in a professional setting, in an advertising agency, at a meeting which included 2 of the most powerful and well-known names in our industry, and in a meeting where she was the only woman amongst a whole group of her professional male peers and colleagues, where one of those 2 very powerful men said to her, "You look like you really need to get fucked." Here's what happens when you do that to us. You instantly dehumanize us. You strip us of all professional credibility. You reduce us to sexual objects, and you ensure that all the men around us will never look at us in the same way again, and you destroy our career path when you do that. Sexual harassment is actively preventing gender equality in our business. It's also preventing women getting into creative and female leadership who would therefore be the leaders who would welcome and make happen equality, diversity, and inclusion. But the business implications go far beyond that. Everybody photograph this slide, because I want every man and woman in our industry to read every single word of this post. A year ago, Megan Averill conducted a research study in partnership with the 3% Conference. She interviewed 20 women in the US ad industry, and she wrote this report of her findings. And this post is the single best summation of advertising industry culture and why it is the way it is that I have ever read in my entire life. So I want you to read every single word of this post, and when you do, I want you to bear something in mind. I want you to bear in mind the fact that our industry's entire reason for being is to sell brands and products on behalf of our clients to consumers. Our industry's primary target consumer, therefore, is women, who are the primary purchasers of everything and the primary influencers of the purchase of everything. And when you read this post, I want you to remember that our clients, therefore, charge our industry with creating advertising and communications to women that are empathetic to women, relevant to women, engaging to women, compelling to women, and respectful of women. And when you read this post, no wonder 90% of women say that they feel advertising doesn't understand them and isn't relevant to them and doesn't engage them. Madonna Badger's excellent campaign, Women Not Objects, focuses on the way that women are depicted in advertising. But this campaign is equally relevant to the way that a vast amount of men in our industry see the women literally in advertising, in the advertising industry. And that is a huge impediment business-wise, because one of the recurring motifs in the emails I'm getting is, I left the industry. I was forced out. I couldn't take it anymore. Retaliation, my career was going nowhere. I left. Our industry has hemorrhaged vast amounts of female talent, creativity, and skills because of sexual harassment. And we have therefore lost the innovative, disruptive, different other perspectives that would have completely reinvented the advertising industry for its future, created a far better future for it, and enabled it to be a thriving, profitable industry. Sexual harassment is the single biggest business issue our industry faces because it is actively preventing our industry business moving forwards. Emily Peck wrote in the Huffington Post last week, of course there are male allies, but generally speaking, men are fine with the massive power imbalance. Work events at escort bars, conversations about porn stars, much worse harassment. Everyone stands by as the boss acts completely inappropriately with his female subordinates. The male-dominated culture makes it all okay. She was talking generally. As you all know perfectly well, that is a snapshot of our industry. And her piece was titled, "The Lack of Women Leaders is a National Emergency." The lack of women leaders in our industry is a national emergency for our industry. And it leads to appalling syndromes like this one. I want you all to read every word of this piece as well, which Marion Kogan wrote in the New York Times last week. The title is, "When You Are Replaceable and He Will Never Be." And this is all about the fact that young women and men coming into the ad industry, the only mentors available to them are senior, powerful men, because women are not in leadership. And the men in our industry are abusing that power through so-called mentorships that are masks for sexual harassment and inappropriate sexual relationships. The problem is compounded by the lack of more experienced women in positions of power to mentor their young counterparts. Real change will require the willingness of men to promote women and share power, and it will require a serious investment in the work and ideas of young women so that they aren't made to feel disposable anymore. Rebecca Traister wrote in The Cut last week a piece titled, "Our National Narratives Are Still Being Shaped by Lecherous, Powerful Men." She wrote, "We cannot retroactively resituate the women who left jobs, who left their whole careers because of the navigation of the risks. These daily diminutions and abusers drove them out. Nor can we retroactively see the movies they would have made, or the art they would have promoted. Nor can we read the news as they might have reported it. Nor can we see the advertising that they might have produced, the awards they would have won, the happy, productive advertising agencies they would have managed and led, and the future for the advertising industry that they would have driven." There are two very simple solutions to this. I've talked at length about both of these in many talks before. You can find me talking about them in my 3% Conference Closing Keynote 2015. But very briefly, Number one, make every level and work environment at your agency gender equal, more female than male as quickly as possible. Because sexual harassment magically disappears in environments that are gender equal or more female than male, because there is no longer the male-dominated environmental implicit bro endorsement, it's okay to operate like that, and because when men are surrounded every hour of every day with women with whom they are forced to interact as professional equals, they cease to see women in one of only two roles, girlfriend or secretary. The second point is, openly promote and establish an aspirational societal gold standard of what constitute good sexual values and good sexual behavior.